Hello, this is PsychBee, and today we're going to be talking about kind of like professionalism in school or the practicum sites rather than just having a job on its own, because I think those standards just kind of come with the territory. But a lot of us, when we're in a space where we're transitioning between maybe private life and public life, like our own day jobs and things like that, be we, like me, a cook or whatever like that, and transferring into a more academic space and going through that and entering a professional space, sometimes we don't know exactly what's appropriate or expected, especially since a lot of times the norms are not really set. And by norms, I mean what other people actually do. Because you can have as many rule books as you want about dress codes and advice from people about, not cussing or whatever like that. And all of a sudden you're in a professional setting and people are wearing Batman t shirts to clinical interviews, or they are just cussing like sailors interpersonally without obviously doing those sorts of behaviors uh, with clients and things like that, and to supervisors, professors, whatever. So, um, reading the room is probably the biggest skill that one would need, and that would be reading the room would be reading and observing your peers or your upperclassmen, um, if that makes any sense, as far as just the people who've been there before you, the same as you do any other job. So anything resembling kind of got yous are probably not appropriate. I understand, however, it can be frustrating if you as an individual get called out for something that someone who's been there for 3 years is doing. That's going to happen in every single workplace. That's going to happen in every single college. That's going to happen everywhere, because that's called a hierarchy. And hierarchies are bad and we don't like them, but they exist everywhere. And they exist to support positions of power. And yeah, they're not very fun, but yeah, there's tearing them down mostly involves either reaching a position of power where I don't know, you just reinforce the institution, or just leaving. So I'm not saying it's hopeless, and I'm not saying that there's no way to express certain double standards, but certainly as far as the minutia of professionalism, I'm not talking about harassment, I'm not talking about abuse, I'm not talking about misconduct or ethics violations. I'm specifically talking about double standards of professionalism. Yeah, there's very little recourse that we can expect. And that kind of makes common sense to a degree. That sort of tribalism, the way that we're built. As far as professionalism, when it comes to kind of undergrad studies and how we approach academics, like let's say you're a freshman in college or a junior at your 4 year school and you don't know anyone. Do people expect you to uh, dress professionally? And the answer is no. Um, it's very difficult to get taken seriously by someone that you may be looking for towards a letter of recommendation if you look extremely unprofessional. So that's more the gatekeeping there. And I understand that's incredibly classist. And I myself, went through a period of going to Goodwill, which is a thrift store in America, to I don't know, get appropriate clothing for certain jobs, and that would be like practicum sites or interviews and things like that. So, as far as an access issue goes, people acknowledge that it exists, but they typically expect that someone with the mental resources, maybe not the financial ones, but people with the mental resources will be able to circumvent that and, uh, you know, beg, borrow, thrift something that's presentable. And you're not judged from there by the quality of your dress, but simply more for being professional in the effort. Like, and maybe, I mean, I can imagine that being, large state schools, Ivy League, stuff like that. But I wouldn't think that would be an instructor related thing. That would be more peer related if anyone would ever look down on them for the quality of their clothing and stuff like that. That would be legitimately cartoonish, and having interacted with people, with people in institutions, interacting with classism and people of color and women's issues and stuff like that, because women have a very difficult time finding appropriate professional clothing without the right financial resources, and that's something that gets kind of shuffled off when we're all worried about how to buy men's suits. Yeah, it's difficult for women in difficult financial circumstances to create a wardrobe that is both professional and feels good and engages in confidence and things like that. So these considerations aren't ignored, and they are certainly they aren't ignored, but at the same time, I would argue that they're not judged very much by well-meaning educators, and I would argue that most educators are well-meaning. I think the age of the kind of really tough battle axe gatekeeper is really dying out, and instead, we have this generation that came up in the 60s and 70s and 80s as far as getting their doctorate degrees, and they're very aware of the kind of situations people are under. So as far as professionalism concerns, the classism in the institution itself is rapidly fading. And I don't mean that to say that it doesn't exist, but I do mean that as a relief, I don't think it's as overt now. Does institutional racism and private bias by everyone still exist? Absolutely, yeah. No, your professors will admit to that. That's kind of like part about being within the woke system. Quote unquote, is that people acknowledge this and that they make errors and that they're cognizant of them and they're trying to do their best. But as far as that level of I don't know, class bias against how people dress, it's all about effort, and that's going to be the same attitude with engagement and other professional attitudes. People just want you to appear there, especially if you're going to ask them for help at a later point in time, as such as letters of recommendation or be it for a graduate program or a research program or an honors thesis. If you want them to review that, creating an engaged environment with them is going to be probably the best thing that you can possibly do. And so the big thing is to just be present and not shoot yourself in the foot. I think that's pretty much a good starting point. I can probably go in deeper in this about you know practicum sites, deeper institutions, graduate school, and stuff like that. And I probably will. We can go into social media and things like that. So this is looking like a little bit of a series, but just as far as the undergrad goes, I think that's pretty much a great starting point as far as the conversation. And thanks for listening.